So let's start with part one. We're going to start by talking about antecedent and instructional strategies. And I want to spend this first section telling you a little bit about how it connects to the last two modules and then share a really exciting resource with you that can be a great reference for you going forward. So first, when we spent the first two modules talking about the basics of behavioral theory, we've defined setting events, antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. And the big idea of how we apply these things is that we look for ways to prevent problem behavior from happening in the first place by thinking first about how do we modify the environment to either remove triggering antecedents or increase antecedents for appropriate behavior or neutralize setting events. We then think about how do we teach new behaviors really explicitly, and then finally we think about how to modify the consequences to make problem behavior less effective than appropriate behavior. The bulk of this course, and specifically this module, are going to talk about these proactive classroom management strategies that are antecedent and setting event manipulations and some specific teaching strategies that will help you proactively manage the behaviors in your classroom. That is, we are not waiting for problem behaviors to occur. We are going to teach kids and support them, set them up for success so that they aren't creating behavioral errors in the first place. We'll talk later on in this series of modules about how to react when students do display inappropriate behavior, but for this module, we're really focused on these proactive classroom management strategies. If we're relying on reactive classroom management strategies, whether that's positive reinforcement or positive consequences or negative consequences, in both cases, we've really missed the boat. We really need to spend the bulk of our time and energy thinking about how do we prevent problem behavior from happening. As I said, we'll talk more about that as we go through. Let's start with defining what the 5 critical features of classroom management are. It starts with maximizing structure and really thinking about how do you create a classroom environment where kids know what to expect when they walk in. What is the physical environment signal to them? How is it organized? Do they know where they go? Do they know where their things go? And what are the routines? What do they do when they first enter? What do transitions look like? How do they exit the classroom? All of those different things are part of maximizing the structure in your classroom. The second critical feature is to establish, be really clear on what the expectations are, and make sure kids know what those are by directly teaching those, prompting and monitoring and reinforcing those expectations. This is really just teaching social skills in the classroom. The third evidence-based classroom management strategy is to actively engage kids in observable ways. That is, if kids are engaged with you during instruction, by default, they're not engaged in problem behavior. And so we really want to make sure that we develop instruction that is as engaging as possible so that students are with us in the activity as opposed to creating their own entertainment with their inappropriate behaviors. And then numbers 4 and 5 are about developing a continuum of strategies to both acknowledge appropriate behavior and discourage inappropriate behavior. And we'll spend more time talking about those when we get into the later modules, but those are really about, what do you do when kids do the right thing and what do you do when kids do the wrong thing, and having more than one strategy that you can go to. And so the basis of this entire course is to make sure that you walk away with a clear understanding of what these 5 classroom management strategies are and how to use them in your classroom. We're going to give you lots of direct instruction about what that looks like in a lot of different examples, but we want you to remember that each classroom and each of your instructional groups that you work with is really different, and each of these practices has to be implemented in a way that matches your context or matches the culture of the students that you work with in a relevant way. And so we're going to ask you to think critically about how you can modify the critical features of what we talk about and make it best fit your classroom. And because we're not in your classroom, we have to rely on you and your coaching supports to help get that in place. But we want you to kind of walk away thinking about that from the very, very beginning. How do you take what we're teaching you and modify it to really fit your classroom context? So first, let's think a little bit about what classroom management is and what it is not. First, it's not a magic fix. We can unfortunately not make anybody else do anything. So this is not going to be just an easy one-size-fits-all strategy that you take this one thing and you go do it in your classroom and you have no more classroom management problems. So that's one sort of quick pre-correct to get out of the way. What classroom management is redesigning the learning environment. That is, we're changing the environment to make it more likely that kids know what to do. Make it more likely that it's easier for them to do the right thing than it is for them to do the wrong thing. And so we are redesigning the environments thinking about the function of behavior that we talked about in the first two modules, thinking about what is this behavior doing for the kid? Why do they continue to engage in it? And how can I modify the environment to make it more likely that they can get that need met, but in a way that's a little bit more socially appropriate? Classroom management is not fixing individual students. So we are not going to go in and fix Johnny, but what we are going to do is change the behavior of the adults. That is, I, as the instructor, can change how I interact with a student or change how I set a student up for success. That is what changes the behavior. So we're really focused on changing adult behavior that will lead to a change in student behavior rather than the other way around. And so it's a really important thing to keep in mind as we go through these modules, because we're going to talk mostly about things that you as the teacher or you as the implementer can do in your classroom, and less about things that the students will actually do. I want to bring your attention to a really exciting resource that was released actually at the White House a couple years back. It is called Supporting and Responding to Behavior. You can find it at pbis.org. You can also find it at the OSEP Strategies That Work website. I'm going to take you quickly through this resource just so you know what's in it. So it starts out with an interactive map. It is not designed to be printed, so do not print this resource, but instead use these hyperlinks to find what you're looking for. So on this first interactive map of core features, you will find foundational practices, preventative practices, response practices, and then some data systems. We're going to cover all of this content over the course of all of the modules in this course, starting with the foundations and the preventative practices. Those are our antecedent and setting event strategies. Moving towards our response practices, which are the consequence strategies that we'll use. And then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about how to use data to monitor your implementation of these things as well. And so we're going to cover all of this. If at any point you want to go back and learn about the specific information, you can just go to this interactive map, click on the blue hyperlink, and it will take you to the section of the document that describes that. Another way to get to the information is using this self-assessment. It walks you through a number of quick yes/no questions. If you answer no to any one of these, click on that blue hyperlink. It will take you to the section of the document where you can learn more about that particular strategy. It also walks you through a decision-making guide, and we're going to teach this decision-making guide in a later module where we really think about when do we apply the different strategies in the classroom. But this decision-making guide is there to help you think about how to respond to problem behaviors. And then I think the most helpful piece of this document are these tables. And for every single strategy that we're going to talk about in this course and that's listed in this resource, there is a table. The table defines the critical features. It gives elementary school examples, secondary examples. It gives some non-examples that helps clarify some common errors or misconceptions that we see people make mistakes with when they're using these strategies. And then finally, over on this last column, you'll see links to research that helps support the use of this strategy, and videos or other training materials that you can go to learn more about the particular strategy that you're looking at. And then finally, there's some additional tools for how to respond to behaviors that are still occurring in your classroom, and we'll get to this when we start to think about how do we intensify supports. This document pulls it all together with a couple of scenarios for how teachers use these strategies in their classroom. We think it's a pretty helpful document, and we encourage you to check that out.